Hey folks, Dale Davidson here, the VA guy. Thank you for joining us today. So, hey look, there are a lot of changes to the VA rating schedules that are coming down the road. You've probably heard about them, seen them in the news, on the internet, and all that kind of stuff. So, I got to thinking, what did I want to talk about in this video today as it relates to these rating changes? And, I thought, they're going to be what they're going to be, okay? Whatever the VA says the changes are, they are. You either meet the criteria for that rating or you don't. So I thought to myself, hey, look, how can I, as the VA guy, help everybody out there, you watching today, file successful compensation claims, okay? Even in the face of all these changes, the rating schedule changes, where do you start? Okay, so think about this as building a house, okay? So you always want to start with a good foundation. As long as your foundation is good, you can build, pretty big, tall buildings like the ones in New York or Chicago or wherever, or a big house, whatever. We're going to get back to the basics, the foundation, because if you have a firm foundation, you should be successful in your claim. Now, each benefit administered by the VA has its own unique eligibility requirements. There's VA compensation, there's pension, there's education, there's all these different programs and they have all their different eligibility requirements. We're focusing on compensation today. But there are basic principles of eligibility common to all VA benefit programs. Now, those fundamental principles, as I would call them, is how the VA determines are you eligible or not. Our first eligibility requirement is, and we've talked about this before, are you even a veteran? Okay, in terms of what the VA considers to be a veteran. Now, the VA bases its definition of a veteran on whether or not you had military service, whether your service was active, and under what circumstances were you discharged? Basic question. Did you serve in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Space Force? Where did you serve? If you did serve in one of those branches, was your service active? Now, I've talked in the past about active versus non-active type service, okay? And as a general rule, active service does not include your service in the reserves or the National Guard. But there are exceptions to the rules. We just got to look at them, okay? So, third basic eligibility requirement. Was your discharge honorable or not? They call it, was your discharge less than honorable? If so, then you're probably not going to be eligible. But again, there are ways to change your discharge status from less than honorable to something else, okay? But again, it's a process, okay? Now, other basic principles impact your eligibility for certain kinds of benefits. Again, I gave some examples earlier, but here's some more. So, whether active military service was during a time of war, that would, say, apply to VA pension. For instance, if you were in Korea, Vietnam, now there's certain periods of time where you had to be actively in country in Vietnam, whereas other times you don't have to be there. But those are basic, was during a wartime period for pension. How long did you serve? For instance, for pension, you've got to serve at least 1 day active military service during a qualifying wartime period, and then 90 days of consecutive service thereafter. So, again, length is important too. The best way I can describe, or the way to think about VA claims process, is to separate how the VA decides this into 2 different steps. Okay? So step number 1, If you're applying for VA benefits, you've got to establish your basic eligibility. Now, that term eligibility relates again to your general qualifications for VA benefits. Do you meet the definition of a veteran? We just talked about that. Was your service active? We talked about that. We also looked at whether it's reserves and National Guard qualifies. As a general rule, no, but there are exceptions. And then under what circumstances were you discharged? Basic eligibility requirements. Second, you've got to establish that you're actually entitled to a particular benefit sought. The term entitlement relates to the qualification, your qualification, whether you're a veteran, a dependent of a veteran, survivor of a veteran, whatever your status is. You've got to make sure that there's a rule there that says that you're actually entitled to a particular benefit, assuming that the veteran met basic eligibility requirements as discussed. So again, first rule, basic eligibility requirements got to be met, and then you got to look to see if you're eligible. All right? So you met the basic eligibility requirements. What's next? So we're talking about compensation today. So for service-connected disability compensation, you've got to submit some kind of competent evidence that you have a current disability. You've got to submit evidence that you have a current disability. This is done usually with competent medical evidence that would include maybe your VA medical records, private doctor records, current CNP exams, etc. Now, you're going to be hard-pressed to prove a current disability without any competent medical evidence. That is crucial. If you don't have competent medical evidence of a current disability, your claim is going to be denied. It's very, very difficult to prove a current disability without medical evidence. You kept hearing me talk about current disability. Now, VA compensation is only available if you have a current disability. You're not eligible for compensation simply because you contracted a disease or suffered some kind of injury while on active duty. Let's say that, I don't know, you sprained your ankle while you were in service. Okay, but your ankle's fine. No issues right now. You're not eligible for any kind of compensation just because you sprained your ankle in service because you don't have a current disability. Maybe you contracted some kind of illness, but there's no lasting symptoms of that illness. You don't qualify. Simply proving exposure to Agent Orange if you were in Vietnam or Thailand or wherever you may have been, or other environmental hazards such as the Persian Gulf War, Camp Lejeune, or you participated in some kind of radiation risk activities, that's not sufficient to establish your entitlement to service-connected disability compensation. You've got to have a disability that arose from that exposure, and it's got to be current, okay? So to be entitled for compensation, you got to prove that you have a current disability or current disabling residuals from an in-service disease. I don't know what that may be. Let's talk about maybe you dislocated your knee. And as a result of that dislocation while in service, now you have arthritis in your knee. That's a residual, or could be considered a residual of your knee injury during in service. So that may be considered a current disability, but you got to have current medical evidence or medical evidence to substantiate that disability. If you don't show a current disability, your claim is going to be denied. The last and basic requirement, and I think is the most overlooked requirement of a successful claim, is demonstrating a nexus. And you've heard me over and over and over again talk about nexus. That is a link between, or some kind of connection between your current disability and your service. I was in Vietnam. I was exposed to Agent Orange. I now have prostate cancer. I was a veteran. I have a current disability, and it was a result of the exposure to Agent Orange. So I've got my nexus, okay? You've got to have some kind of connection that connects your disability to your service. In the VA language, this third requirement, which I call nexus, is often referred to as whether the disability or whether your disability is service connected or whether service connection has been established. It's easier just to say nexus. Again, I like nexus because it's a simple term for me. Of the three requirements we talked about, again, the most common reason the VA denies claims for compensation is that these folks who are veterans such as yourself or family members haven't been able to prove a nexus between a current disability and something that occurred during their military service. Now, there's a lot of different ways to prove a nexus besides medical. I have read countless Board of Appeals decisions where nexus was proved through buddy statements, saying, yes, I was there when Dale did this, or this happened to Dale, or whatever it may have been. But a lot of times we've lost touch with whoever we served with, so we don't even know where they are to get those buddy statements. So I always try to rely on medical evidence because that's the best. And if you can get your doctor to say, hey, it's more likely than not that Dale's bad knees are a result of him jumping out of perfectly good airplanes while he was in the paratroopers. Okay, I wasn't in the paratroopers, okay, but that's an example. So, I have a video on Nexus and where I talk about the 5 basic ways to prove Nexus. And the first one is there's a direct or causative link between your current disability and something that actually occurred during your period of military service. This is what I call the direct service connection. I was in Vietnam and I was shot or injured in some way, okay? So yeah, I was there, I was active, and my problems with my shoulder where I was shot or wherever I was are directly related to my injury. That's a direct service connection. Number 2, my current disability pre-existed my service, but was aggravated or became worse during my service. This is known as aggravation. We actually have a client who had issues when he was a child, had a surgery to correct it, went into the Air Force. They saw where the scar was on his chest where they corrected the lung issue. VA has denied him compensation benefits because they said that his injury pre-existed his service. And that's true. But, again, aggravation counts too. They rated him at 0% disabled when they let him in the Air Force. When he came back from all those burn pits and particulates and all that stuff he breathed over in the Gulf War, his lungs are now at 40%. So he lost 60% of his lung capacity because of breathing and all that. So we're arguing aggravation as far as his nexus is concerned. Okay, number 3, your current disability is a condition that did not arise in of itself or didn't show up, whatever you had no symptoms or anything while in service, but it's presumed to have started or been connected to your service because of an event. This is the presumptive service connection. For instance, Agent Orange in Vietnam, Camp Lejeune drinking water, the PACT Act, and the burn pits and all of those things over in the Gulf War, those provide a laundry list of presumptive service connection disabilities. So if you had one of those, there's your nexus. You don't have to prove it. You still got to prove your basic eligibility, still got to prove your basic current disability, but you don't have to prove your nexus. Number 4, so your current disability is caused or aggravated by some kind of medical condition, and that your primary medical condition in of itself is connected to your military service. So this is a service, a secondary service connections type of nexus, okay? And then the last one is the current condition is the consequence of it's like a VA medical malpractice claim. This happened when you were receiving some kind of medical services through the VA. So you were injured through their negligence, so you've got that nexus there. So look, I know that for some of y'all that this video was pretty basic, but if you're having trouble getting the maximum benefit you're entitled to, it's not the rating schedule. More likely than not, you have a nexus problem or some kind of proof problem with medical records or whatever. So maybe you need to present additional medical evidence to show the VA of the severity of your disability. Maybe you need to get a medical opinion that says it's more likely than not that your condition, your current disability, is caused by your service or whatever happened to you in the service, okay? Maybe that you got to give them some kind of medical evidence that says, yeah, we had this condition prior to service and it was pre-existing, but my condition was aggravated because of my service, okay? For instance, my lung condition got worse because I breathing in all that stuff over in Iraq and Iran and all that, wherever it may be, okay? But there are a number of things that could be wrong with your case, but these are the most common. We like to give the VA as much information as possible because we want them to rule quickly. But we also give them some, if we've got some issues or some sticking points, we also like to provide them with some legal argument as to why this rating should be invoked versus this other rating, a lower rating. So in kind of conclusion, I would just say, look, never rely on the VA for your medical opinions. Always get a second opinion from your private physician. Of course, unless you agree with the VA physician and you're at 100% disabled, that's okay. So, hey folks, thank you for watching today. Check out this video, Are You a Veteran? How Do You Know? Where I'm discussing the basic eligibility requirements for VA compensation. So until next time, be blessed.